Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Zachary, and if you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you I was happily married. I genuinely believed she was the kind of person I thought I'd grow old with. I trusted her with everything in me, not just because we'd been together for a long time, but because she never gave me a reason not to. We were married for 6 years, and before that, we dated for 3. That's almost a decade of my life wrapped up in one person. I thought we were in this for the long haul. So imagine what it feels like to wake up one day and realize that the person you loved most went out of town for a wedding, and somewhere between the vows and the dance floor, she gave herself to another man and came back to infect me with an STD. It broke me, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. And in that moment, I knew this marriage wasn't worth saving. When I met Ruth, the woman who would eventually become my wife, she captured my heart. She was thoughtful, attentive, and present. When you find someone who brings peace into your life, you don't question it. You hold on to it. We dated for 3 years before we got married. And during those 3 years, I never once felt like I had to question her loyalty. She was more than just my girlfriend. She was my best friend. We'd talk about everything. She'd always say she wanted a big family, 3, maybe 4 kids. I wanted that too. So when we finally got married, I honestly believed we were building something unshakable. 6 years into that marriage, I still loved her just as deeply because love grows when you go through things together. And we did go through things. The biggest one was the struggle to have kids. After we got married, we started trying almost right away. But Ruth had 2 miscarriages, one after the other. The doctors eventually advised us to take a break, to give her body some time to recover. Emotionally, it was a difficult time for both of us. We were grieving something that never got a chance to be. But I told her, we'll be okay. We'll get through this together. And I believe that. From the outside, everything looked normal. Nobody gets into a marriage thinking the person they trust most in the world is going to betray them. I sure didn't. Ruth was the last person I ever expected to lie to me, let alone cheat. But life has a way of throwing you into situations you didn't sign up for. And sometimes the people you think you know best turn out to be hiding a side of themselves you never imagined existed. One evening, Ruth got an invitation to a close friend's wedding. It was a destination wedding that everyone flew out to and turned into a weekend getaway. When Ruth brought the invitation to me, she was excited, talking about how it would be nice to be around friends again, how it'd be good to take a break. I looked at the cost of flights, hotels, and the travel back, and honestly, it didn't seem wise for both of us to go at that time. Things were tight on my end. I was dealing with some deadlines at work that I couldn't afford to miss. So I told her to go without me. I thought it would be a sweet gesture. It's your friend's big day, I told her. Go. Enjoy yourself. Before she left, I drove her to the airport myself. I wanted to see her off properly. We got there early enough, and I stayed with her through check-in, waited while she got her boarding pass. I remember waving at her as she turned that corner, smiling. I had no reason, none whatsoever, to feel uneasy. The week she was gone, my job kept me busy, and I used that as a way to fill the silence in the house. The day she flew back, I was there waiting at arrivals. She came out looking like herself. On the drive home, she talked about how beautiful the wedding was. I nodded along, adding in my comments here and there, happy that she'd had a good time. She seemed happy. That evening, we had dinner together, sat across from each other, and talked like we usually did. Then we curled up on the couch and caught up on a show or 2. Later that night, we got intimate, and she fell asleep in my arms, just like she always had. I didn't feel a single shift in our rhythm. Suppose you'd asked me, after she returned, whether I trusted her. I would have told you yes, without blinking. I had no idea what that wedding had really meant, or what it had set in motion. It was about 3 weeks after Ruth got back from the wedding trip that I started feeling unwell. I couldn't really explain it at first. I figured maybe I had pushed myself too hard at work, or wasn't drinking enough water. But as the days went by, the symptoms didn't go away. In fact, they got worse. It reached a point where I knew this wasn't something I could ignore anymore. So I booked a doctor's appointment. At the clinic, I explained everything I was feeling, down to the last awkward detail. I've never been the kind of guy who likes hospitals, but I needed answers. They ran some tests, and hours later, when the doctor came back with the results, he said I tested positive for an STD. I actually laughed at first. I told him that it couldn't be right, that there had to be some sort of mistake with the test. I told him, "Doc, I've only ever been with my wife. I don't mess around. You've got the wrong guy." But he just looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes people aren't as honest as we believe." That sentence hit me. I sat there, stunned, hearing the words but not really processing them. Even with that result in my hand, my mind was racing with excuses, trying to protect the version of her I had built up over the years. So I told myself, maybe this clinic messed up the test. I went to a second clinic. Different part of town. Different lab. I went through the whole process again. Waited a couple of days. And when those results came in, it was the same outcome. Positive. That second test made it obvious that I couldn't deny it anymore. And this wasn't a mistake. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to just barge into the living room and accuse Ruth. What if I was wrong about how I got it? What if there was some kind of mix-up still? I didn't want to throw out a marriage over suspicion and regret it later. So instead of confrontation, I made a choice. I would investigate quietly. I started paying closer attention. I waited for the moment when she'd leave her phone unattended. When I finally got my hands on it, I checked everything: texts, call logs, photos, and social media. But there was nothing there. Either she'd cleaned up really well, or she hadn't used her phone for whatever happened. It only added to my frustration. I started questioning myself again. What if I really got it from somewhere else? What if the doctor was wrong twice? I didn't want to believe it was her. But then, one evening, I was cleaning up our bedroom while she was in the kitchen making dinner. I went to grab something from her bag, and that's when I saw a small, almost empty prescription bottle. It had her name on it. I didn't even recognize the medication, so I did what anyone would do. I searched it online right there on my phone. My heart sank. It was antibiotics, the kind prescribed for treating an STD. That was the confirmation I didn't want but couldn't ignore anymore. I stood there, holding the bottle. Then I called my wife, Ruth. "Can you come here for a second?" She came in, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, completely unaware. I held up the bottle and asked, "How did you get an STD?" That was the question that broke the mask. First, she tried to act confused. "What are you talking about?" Then she looked at the bottle and said, "Oh, that's not for me. It's for my friend. She asked me to pick it up for her." I couldn't help it. I laughed because it was insulting. That was her excuse? I told her point blank, "We're going for a test. Both of us." She immediately tensed up. "You can't force me to do that," she snapped. And that's when I laid it out. "I don't have to force you. I already got tested. Twice. And I came back positive." Her face went pale. She didn't try to lie anymore. She started crying. "Please." "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I stood there, watching the woman I had once adored beg for forgiveness. And even then, part of me hoped she'd say something that would make it less awful. That it was some kind of misunderstanding. But no. She admitted that it happened at the wedding. Said it was a guy she used to be close with in college. That they'd had too much to drink, and one thing led to another. She thought telling the truth would make it easier to forgive. But all I could think about was how I kissed her when she came back. How I held her. How we made love that night. And all the while, she knew and carried on like nothing had happened. And in that moment, whatever love I still had for her was now tangled up in disgust, betrayal, and a sense of humiliation I can't describe. I just walked out. Ruth was still standing there in the bedroom, her face wet with tears, calling out my name as I made my way down the hall. But I didn't look back. I needed air and space. It felt like my chest was caving in, like something heavy was pressing down on me from the inside. I had trusted this woman with everything in me. And now, I had an STD to show for it. When I came back home later that evening, I took my pillow, a blanket, and moved straight into the guest room. My mind was a mess. Ruth tried to act normal. She made dinner, like always. She knocked on the door softly and told me it was ready. I didn't answer or come out to eat. And every time she saw me moving around the house after that day, she'd try to talk to me, say she was sorry, say she didn't mean for it to happen, that she was drunk, that she made a stupid mistake. She kept using that word, mistake. But every time she said it, I felt something in me harden even more. The truth is, her confession didn't come out of guilt. It came out of fear. Because she didn't confess until I showed her the bottle of medication. She didn't come clean until she had no other choice. If I hadn't found that bottle, if I hadn't tested positive, would she have ever told me at all? That's what kept me up at night. That's what made it impossible to believe anything else she said. I started to look at everything differently. Was this really the first time? Or just the first time she got caught? I didn't know anymore. That week in the guest room, I barely slept. After 7 days of silence and wrestling with my thoughts, I made my decision. I didn't give her a chance to talk me out of it. I just went ahead and filed for divorce. Quietly. I didn't tell her because I didn't owe her another opportunity to explain why she betrayed me. And since we didn't have any children, there was nothing binding us anymore. No reason to stay and pretend this could ever be repaired. She had already made her choice. Now I was making mine. When Ruth got served the divorce papers, she didn't take it quietly. I remember coming home from work that evening, and there she was, standing by the doorway with red eyes. The papers must have been dropped off earlier in the day, and she'd clearly already gone through them. She broke down the moment I stepped in and said, "Please, Zachary, please don't do this. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I told her calmly that this wasn't just a mistake. What she did was a choice. And worst of all, the fact that she only admitted to it after I found the medication and told her I was already infected. That wasn't a moment of weakness. That was a pattern of betrayal wrapped in cowardice. I told her point blank, "I can't trust you anymore. You lied and waited for me to discover it on my own. That's not love. That's manipulation." I also told her she couldn't stay in the house anymore. The house was a gift from my mother, and the title was still under her name. I made that clear to her. "You're going to have to move out, Ruth. After everything you've done, you don't get to stay and act like none of it happened." She didn't take that well. Her tears turned to frustration. I don't know if she thought I'd change my mind or if someone in her corner filled her head with false hope, but instead of leaving quietly, she escalated the whole thing to court. My lawyer laid everything bare. He presented the facts, the medical records, the timeline, and the argument was simple. This woman not only broke her marital vows, she endangered my health and then tried to cover it up. That's more than grounds for divorce. That's grounds for removal. Ruth, of course, tried to spin it differently. But the court wasn't interested in emotional appeals without facts. The judge looked at the documents, heard both sides, and gave the ruling. She had to vacate the property. A firm date was given. This was never about punishing her. It was about protecting myself from a life that was built on a lie. We were close to finalizing the divorce. The legal back and forth had been long, tiring, and honestly, I was counting the days until I could close that chapter of my life and move forward in peace. But out of nowhere, Ruth and her lawyer came back to court with a fresh claim, one that changed the entire direction of things. Ruth stood there in front of the judge and said she was 16 weeks pregnant, and that the baby was mine. I remember sitting there trying to keep a straight face, but inside, my stomach dropped. I didn't know whether to laugh, panic, or walk straight out of the courtroom. Because here's the thing, was it possible the baby was mine? Sure. We were still sleeping together before I found out about the affair. But that doubt, that little gap in trust that her betrayal had created, it made me question everything. I had already tested positive for an STD she gave me. She had already admitted to cheating. And now, after being caught, after I filed for divorce, she shows up talking about a baby? The timing was suspicious, and my instincts told me not to take her word at face value. I wasn't even sure she was telling the truth about being pregnant at first. But she had medical confirmation, and so the court took it seriously. The judge decided that paternity had to be established before the divorce could be finalized. That meant everything, every document, every agreement, every ounce of closure I was building toward had to be paused, put on hold, just like that, until the baby was born and the truth came out. Those months of waiting were brutal, not just because of the legal delay, but because of the thoughts racing through my head every single day. What if it were mine? What would that mean? Would she use the child to stay tied to me? Would she suddenly act like the past didn't matter and try to rebuild something I had already buried? I didn't trust her intentions, not anymore. And I definitely didn't trust that this pregnancy was just about the baby. It felt like one more move on her part, a last-ditch attempt to hold onto the life she was losing. When the child was finally born, I didn't waste a second. I made sure the paternity test was done immediately. And when the results came back, proving the baby wasn't mine, I don't even have words to describe the relief that washed over me. I felt like I could finally exhale after holding my breath for months. It confirmed everything I had feared. If I hadn't discovered her cheating when I did, I could have ended up raising another man's child, completely in the dark. That kind of betrayal isn't just cruel, it's life-altering. And knowing I dodged that bullet only made me more grateful that I walked away when I did. That moment, when I saw the results in black and white, was the final seal on my decision. I didn't need more evidence. I didn't need another argument or explanation from her. That baby, that lie, that manipulation all showed me the kind of person she had become. And I knew, without a doubt, I made the right choice. After everything, I still had one thing left nagging at me. I needed to know who the man was. I needed to know exactly who Ruth threw our marriage away for. She had only mentioned that it was some guy she used to be close to in college, but that was too vague for me to sit with. So, I started digging. Quietly. I went through old yearbooks, her Facebook comments, tag photos, and even checked who she followed on Instagram. It didn't happen overnight, but eventually, things started to click. Turns out, the guy she hooked up with at the wedding wasn't just someone from college. He was a married man. Not only did Ruth betray me, but she did it with someone who had also made vows to someone else. At that point, I felt disgust. This wasn't just about me anymore. There was another innocent person out there, living her life, completely unaware that her husband had gotten another woman pregnant. I wrestled with whether or not to say anything. I mean, it wasn't really my business, but then again, if it were me, I'd want to know. So I took the respectful route. I found the man's wife on Facebook after making sure it was really her, and sent her a message. I just told her the truth. I explained that her husband had been involved with my now ex-wife during a wedding trip. I included a couple of references from our court documents, enough to prove that what I was saying wasn't made up. I told her there was a pregnancy involved, that the paternity was initially pinned on me, but tests confirmed the child wasn't mine. I ended the message by saying, "What you choose to do with this information is completely up to you. I just thought you had the right to know." And that was it. I didn't follow up. I didn't lurk on her profile, waiting for a response. I didn't go back to check if their marriage blew up or if she confronted him. I didn't need that closure. When the divorce was finally finalized and the last page was signed, it was like this heavy coat I didn't realize I'd been wearing for months was finally taken off my shoulders. The biggest relief of all was knowing that the child wasn't mine. Because if it had been, no matter how much I wanted to move on, I would have been tethered to Ruth forever. She would have always had a reason to be in my life. But instead, I got to walk away clean, with no lingering chains tying me to a woman I could never trust again. I've learned now that peace doesn't come from trying to fix broken people. It comes from protecting your own spirit.